1940 was born, the first pictures were shown of the great victory over Germany's pocket battleship Graf Spee in the engagement of the River Plate. After a fight lasting 14 hours, the Graf Spee fled for the shelter of Montevideo and was scuttled by the command of Hitler. In the icy seas of midwinter, our warships hunt out every Nazi vessel afloat. So battle-shy were the Huns that scuttling became the order of the day. The German luxury liner Columbus was soaked in benzene and sank in flames, also at Hitler's behest. Meanwhile, the victorious Ajax returned to her home port and added yet another distinction to her battle honors. After 2.5 years on foreign service, she shared with HMS Exeter and Achilles the acclamations of a grateful country. Britain echoed with cheers for the returned heroes of the drama of the River Plate. Still bearing honorable battle scars, Exeter burst at Plymouth. At London's Guildhall, a luncheon given by the Lord Mayor to the conquerors of the inglorious Graf Spee. Mr. Churchill, then First Lord of the Admiralty, paid a great tribute to the officers and men. Then that glorious day at Josingfjord, when men of HMS Cossack with drawn cutlasses and cries of "The Navy is here!" boarded the Altmark and rescued 300 British prisoners. These men from the Nazi hell ship later recounted their experiences to the King and Queen.
Mr. MacDonald was on the Terror, Plymouth.
How many of you were there from the Terror?
Only about 81.
The royal visit to Scotland further afforded Clydesiders an opportunity to give their Majesties one of the most enthusiastic welcomes of their tour. At one famous shipbuilding yard, they could hardly move for the crowds of cheering Scots. Speaking of Clydeside, 10 days following her unobtrusive departure from Clydebank, the largest vessel in the world, the Queen Elizabeth, docked in New York after the most dramatically secret maiden voyage in history. From the biggest ship to the biggest race, the Grand National at Aintree, when Royal Daniele, McMoffat, and a riderless horse monopolized the race up to the last jump, finally in a stupendous finish to be beaten by Bogscar. Then in April, Hitler experienced his first real defeat at Narvik. Captain Warburton Lee led his destroyer flotilla into action, resulting in the immediate destruction of 4 German destroyers. 3 others fled, but were pursued, engaged, and destroyed. The Royal Navy, besides turning the Norwegian fjord into a graveyard of Hitler's warships, effectively closed this door through which the Germans obtained their supplies of Swedish iron ore. Drake would have cheered the men from Narvik. Nearly 10 months after the outbreak of war came the colossal military disaster, culminating in the blazing hell of Dunkirk. Belgium had capitulated, the first French army was broken, and the full force of Germany was hurled against the ever-narrowing, ever-contracting appendix within which the British and French armies fought. Day and night we struggled through to the beaches, staving off what might have been complete annihilation. Then, by a miracle of deliverance achieved by valor, perseverance, and perfect discipline, the enemy was held and even hurled back. The RAF engaged and battered the main strength of the German Air Force, while the Navy, using nearly 1,000 ships of all kinds, carrying over 335,000 men, French and British, out of the jaws of death. There were none but heroes at Dunkirk. It was the most superbly heroic operation of all time, and by the grace of God we achieved the seemingly impossible. Let the greatest tribute of all be paid to the men who fought and fell in the rearguard actions. They fought their last battle from the water's edge. 3 weeks later, France sued for an armistice. But in her hour of defeat, General de Gaulle rallied thousands of his countrymen and became the leader of all free Frenchmen. The whole vicious venom of Germany's war machine was then turned against the British Isles. Long-range guns on the French coast tried to smash our convoys. With shell and bomb, the Nazis frantically attempted to cripple our shipping. But they're up against British seamen, the toughest, grandest men alive. While their shells come screeching from 20 miles away, the sky above is pockmarked by our anti-aircraft guns. Destroyers lay down smoke screens to hide our merchantmen. Well is this section of England's coastline named Hellfire Corner. Now the Battle of Britain is on. The Germans fling the full weight of their air force against our civilian life. From dusk to dawn they rain high explosive and incendiary bombs in an attempt to terrify us into submission. In this inferno, a newborn army wins glory. the National ARP Services. Hospitals are not immune in the mad, lustful orgy of indiscriminate bombing. Nothing is sacred to the Hun. St. Paul's Cathedral, Wren's masterpiece, received a direct hit when a bomb smashed through the east end of the cathedral and demolished the high altar. The Mother Church of the Empire was twice made a target. The Tower of London became a military objective to the twisted Nazi mind in which love of destruction is inherent. From the very commencement of the Blitzkrieg, the homes of civilians were chosen for Goering's terror tactics. As long as there are historians to record it, the courage and bravery of the British citizens will live forever. No home was inviolate. Buckingham Palace, as much a home as any other, was hit more than once. Our King and Queen had not only their own worries, but shared the sorrows and dangers of their devoted subjects. Those were black days indeed in September, but it was the price we had to pay for victory in the air. By superb heroism, our Air Force inflicted smashing blows on the much-vaunted Luftwaffe. In their hundreds, they littered the countryside from north to south, east to west. The RAF won immortal glory as they blasted the air armadas of our unprincipled enemy. Never in the history of human conflict did so many owe so much to so few. We know now that the mass raids of September were to precede actual invasion, but the aerial vanguard of the Nazis lay a twisted mass of metal on our shores. So overwhelming were the defeats meted out by the RAF that space had to be found to accommodate the tons of wrecked enemy aircraft. With superb daring, our lions with wings hit back at Germany's war industries.
Well, we'd seen a large fire about 25 miles away when we were running up on Berlin. And we flew, that was on the south side of the city. So we went over and had a look at that.
Oh, then you flew across the city?
Yes, slap across the center. Altogether, we spent half an hour checking out on the target. And when we definitely identified it, we ran up and dropped our bombs.
Sergeant John Hanna's heroism typifies the spirit of cool daring. He became the youngest VC of the war by fighting the flames in a blazing bomber in flight. Across the Atlantic, 50 American destroyers make ready to sail for British ports. In exchange for naval bases in the West Indies, Britain received valuable additions to her hard-pressed anti-submarine ships. It is a momentous day in the history of Anglo-American relations. Hands across the sea, as well as arms across the Atlantic. On the anniversary of the fascist march on Rome, Mussolini attacked Greece. On land and sea, the Greeks struck hard and sent the invaders reeling back in confusion. Election fever gripped all America as Franklin Roosevelt won the country with a sweeping victory and became president for a third term. Into the harbors of our great dominions came the youngsters of Britain, evacuated from the perils of Hitler's war on women and children. To the four corners of the earth they went, to be welcomed with open arms by the people of the Commonwealth of Nations. On Armistice Day, a strong formation of Italian aircraft attempted their first attack on London. They were so completely routed by the RAF that those of them who were taken prisoner were the only ones to discover what had hit them. Britain's pilots are aces high. Coventry. From dusk to dawn on a November night, the ancient Midland town was mercilessly bombed by wave upon wave of German planes. Again the King went among his heroic people. Ferociously mauled by the bestial Nazis, Coventry's head was bloody but unbowed. London's underground stations were taken over early as an additional night shelters, thousands accepting comparative discomfort for the sake of safety. Every fighter station gives birth to heroes. The swastika-decorated plane of Squadron Leader Stanford Tuck shows the friendly rivalry between squadrons for the highest number of scouts. The winners of a kitty to go to the first squadron to bring down 600 enemy planes was shared by Flight Lieutenant Mungo Park and Pilot Officer Stevens. As hostilities developed in the Middle East, Italy's forces crumbled beneath the onslaught of Allied pressure. Our forces in Egypt struck blow after blow at the Axis scapegoat. Under the command of General Sir Archibald Wavell, the soldiers of the British Commonwealth of Nations and her allies changed the whole course of the war with their brilliant victories in the Western Desert. The Axis gangsters are badly shaken. The tide is turning. Every man and woman, uniformed or working clothed, is in the front line. Crusaders of the home front, the Navy, the Army, and the Air Force fight in the battle for civilization.